Dawson's Rentals.
Hey YouTube, Dawson Rider here. Welcome to a very special type of ranking video. This is a type of video I'm going to try to start doing every now and then going into the 30th anniversary as a part of a series of videos I will be doing that will be kind of more specialized like this. And I thought about doing it for a while, which is ranking sort of every version of a character. I originally was going to start with either Jason, kind of starting with the Red Ranger, or Rita, because I find there's a lot of different versions of her. But given all of the talk and tribute around JDF, due to his unfortunate passing, I thought, you know, it would be nice to start with Tommy. And he also has a lot of versions to rank. Now, if you're confused by what this means, then get the hell out of here. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, make like a tree and get the hell out of here. I'm joking. I'm joking. So what that means is every time I feel that the character is enough of a different version to rank it. Now this could be something as simple as the movie, comic, and show universe versions are different versions, or it could be a Ranger Mantle, as the version of Tommy that is the Green Ranger is different from Zeo Ranger 5. I'd be surprised by what I consider a different version, but this is my list, and I might have forgotten some, but I think you'll get the idea. But I'm ranking what I consider to be every different version of Tommy in this video. Now to start with some sort of honorable mentions or explainers, I didn't include stuff like the dream sequence versions of him from Fighting Spirit. I mean, I suppose some people might want me to include that based on what I consider to be different versions on this list, but they're not in there. This also has nothing to do with the suits, as there are some versions on this list where I really like the suit, but the character version is low on the list. I might do a separate ranking later, like of, you know, every Green Ranger suit or every suit Tommy wore, but this has nothing to do with suit, it has to do with character. I also didn't include stuff like the White Stranger because technically that's like an ancestor of Tommy and not Tommy himself. And I feel like it goes without saying that the secret honorary #1 version of Tommy is when Jeffrey Perazo voiced him in the SPD team-ups. Let's go ahead and actually get started. So coming in at the bottom of the list is the Bat in the Sun Green Ranger Tommy appearance. Again, this has nothing to do with suit. I love this suit. And the appearance was honestly fine. It was pretty cool and badass, all the appearances he made in like the What If fighting stuff and the Street Fighter stuff. But basically this was just JDF. It really had nothing to do with Tommy. It almost felt more like the fantasy version of like what I imagine he wanted for his Green Ranger solo movie, which there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that, or a variant of Tommy that's like this, but it was a very brief version of Tommy that had very little to do with what I liked about Tommy, and almost felt more like the badass fantasy version of him than actual Tommy. After that on this list, coming in second to the bottom is, that sounded weird, is the White Ranger Tommy from the movie. Now this has nothing to do with the character being bad or at all, because he's basically identical to the one from the show. But that's why he's at the bottom of the list, because, or the almost bottom of the list, is because there's nothing different about him. Like, White Ranger Tommy is ranked significantly higher on this list, but there's nothing to talk about with this version that's different other than his suit. So that's why he's lower on the list. After that is Thomas, the Green Ranger clone. I debated on where to rank this because I don't dislike the character and there are interesting aspects about it. I mean, it is basically just a clone Green Ranger Tommy, a classic, almost comic booky story of a clone character getting a chance to see good Tommy and evil Tommy fight. And there is something I kind of like about Tommy being able to sort of save himself by helping save a version of him from following the same footsteps as the evil Green Ranger. But I also always found it kind of boring. That's like, kind of like when we talk about the idea of redeeming Draken. It's like, no, because Tommy is the Draken redemption story. And it's like, okay, Tommy is the Tommy redemption story. Wouldn't it be cooler to just always have an evil version of Tommy around? And so the fact that you just redeemed both of them always was kind of boring to me. I mean, I guess it's kind of cool, the idea that he stayed behind to be this Wild West guardian. And I always wondered, like, did he guard people in those times as the Green Ranger? But I don't know. I think this only came down to being lower on the list because I always thought it was boring the fact that we redeemed both of them. It's like, yeah, you already had the redemption with Tommy #1. Why not redeem Tommy #2? After that is a weird category because I'm counting both of these, which is Tommy's appearance, the version of him in both Legendary Battle and Dimensions in Danger. I ranked these together because I felt similarly about the appearance. Now, no disrespect, but I did feel that this version that JDF played of Tommy in both his appearances for the anniversaries felt more like JDF Tommy. And you know, I think that gives credit to Tommy or JDF's performance as Tommy in both the original MMPR and Dino Thunder, where, you know, if you watch JDF, if you ever met JDF or you saw his panels or anything, he's got much more of a certain type of confidence and bravado. And Tommy is a little bit more of a gentler character, especially in MMPR, and has a different, quieter confidence in Dino Thunder, where I felt a little bit more of the bravado. Almost want to say ego. I hate to say that, but a little bit of that comes through in his performance in Dimensions in Danger and Legendary Battle, which I felt was at odds with how I felt Tommy was. That's just my opinion. That's just the way I felt and why it ranks a little bit lower. After that, I struggled where to rank this, which is the good version of Green Ranger Tommy from the show, because there are positive aspects about this, which is, I think, something I've been thinking about more recently, is how Tommy, I think this is part of used the Green Ranger powers for good after them being given to him for evil, which ultimately led on his journey to redemption. And I think that's admirable that he was able to use that. And that's my favorite part of the White Ranger story, that the White Ranger story was the destination of him redeeming himself, using these powers for good to the bitter end, and even when he lost his powers, just as plain old Tommy. And there is a really good aspect about that, and a good aspect about that in Tommy's long-running story, especially heading into the White Ranger. However, Green Ranger Tommy, as a good guy, was totes pathetic a lot of the time. And by that, I don't mean he was pathetic because he was good, but just because of the way he was presented. Some of that not necessarily his fault, because it had to do with stuff like Tommy had to be forgetful about his communicator because of Sentai footage. But also, it was always weird, especially on rewatches, how pathetic and weak the character was in battle. Like, it was always presented like the Green Ranger was this powerful trump card, but it seemed like they were always watching him like an injured player on the field. It was constantly like, Tommy's gonna lose his powers, oh, Tommy got a splinter, oh, and he was always like so weak in the field. Like, again, those bigger concepts about him using the powers for redemption were good, but like physically on the field, he always came across as kind of a pathetic liability to the team, so he always ranks a little bit lower for me for this version of the character. And after that is comic White Ranger Tommy. Now, again, there are interesting aspects to this character. I think the strongest aspects of this version of the character come from the backstory we get on White Light, which hammer home more of the redemption elements and Tommy's journey from Green to White Ranger. There was some interesting stuff about Tommy having to learn how to use the White Light power by being in the lead. But beyond that, this version has really been sidelined, which is a bit of a mixed bag because Tommy gets enough focus, so it's nice to have other characters be in the forefront. But outside of those backstory elements, this character always seems so bland to me, and he always just seems there. And I feel that there's so much more they could be doing with his character. He has occasional moments of highlight, but after he became the White Ranger and after they did the backstory, I feel he is just there. Coming up next is Red Ranger Turbo Tommy. This ranks semi-lower just because there's not necessarily inherently like anything wrong with this version of the character, but it just basically continues his traits as Zeo Ranger 5. The only reason I rank it differently is because it's a different mantle, and I would say the differences in this version is that also he shares the mantle with TJ, and so you could argue some people would see TJ more as Turbo Red. And he did have this nice sort of more mentor role he took with Justin, which I think was different than his role as in Zeo. I think like in Zeo, Adam, like for example, Adam I think played a mentor role in Zeo and Turbo. While where in Zeo he played a mentor role a bit to Tanya, he played it a little bit more to Justin. Although I think every Turbo Ranger played a semi-mentor role to Justin. But this version, like if Tommy isn't bad and had some interesting mentor role aspects and the interesting aspect of passing on the mantle, but it was just basically a continuation of his role as a Red Ranger that he had from Zeo. After that is Forever Red Tommy, which is just kind of a mixed bag version. I feel it's kind of this weird mix of Tommy, just as we know him, bit of JDF in there, and a bit of the ambition they had of this version of Mogul Tommy that was going to go into Hexagon that never made it. He ranks a little bit higher just because it's kind of an interesting version of the character that I still think holds on to some of classic Tommy, and it's just kind of almost fun, funny, and interesting to watch this potential version that would have continued in Hexagon. This might surprise people that I'm ranking this later, which is King for a Day Tommy, which was Tommy as Zeo Ranger 5 when he was manipulated into being their leader, and it was sort of a echo of Evil Green Ranger Tommy. I always found this version to be kind of compelling, because it was kind of like his performance as Evil Green Ranger Tommy to an extent, but very mixed and different. And I always thought it was an interesting point for the character. And if they do some repeated beats in the comic universe, I think this would be an interesting one to explore, because I always imagine Tommy worked so hard to get past his brainwashing era and then becoming this heroic ranger as the White Ranger in Zeo Ranger 5. And then to be brought back down to that at this point, I think would be something really interesting to explore in a deeper version of the character. And you have Soul of the Dragon Tommy, which is the latest point of Tommy in the main timeline, kind of their old man Logan story about him wearing out the last morphs of the Master Morpher as he searches for his son. And this was just an interesting version to explore, a sort of, you know, on the last legs of his journey as a Ranger Tommy, getting to explore him as a father and explore like where he might go, or thinking about where he might go in his life outside as a Ranger. It was just an interesting version of the character to explore. And then is just regular Zeo Ranger 5 Red Tommy, which I think is just a good continuation of Tommy's leadership qualities and strengths as the White Ranger, but finally getting to do it as sort of the traditional lead color of the Power Rangers. And I liked Tommy as Zeo Ranger 5. We're getting into the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is the comic version of Green Ranger Tommy. This version is effectively just an expanded version of the show universe Tommy, where you get a lot of his storyline about being the evil Green Ranger and then redeeming himself, but a lot more in-depth, a lot more dealing with his guilt and his feelings on a deeper level, as well as dealing with the team's baggage about that, and the mistrust, and who was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and who wasn't. And I think that was more explored in depth, and I think that early arc really was his time to shine, as you were able to go into those elements deeper, as I thought, and I felt that you were able to feel his redemption and journey and acceptance more. And I think having Draken right there as an example of what could have gone wrong in worst case scenario highlighted that, making for, I think, the most interesting version of good Green Ranger Tommy, evil Green Ranger Tommy, and that whole story. It kind of took all the greatest highlights from the show universe, but we're able to amp it up by having deeper writing and character development. And at number 4 for the top 5 is Evil Green Ranger Tommy. I think that this version is obviously the most iconic for a reason. As I mentioned when talking about like best Tommy moments, the reason the Green Ranger is so popular is kind of easy. I mean, first of all, it was like the only thing that ever happened in MMPR. But also, again, at the time, we only knew a few things for sure about the Rangers. They came in these colors, and they were the good guys. And this was not only a new color we'd never seen, in a cool new suit, he was an evil character. JDF always really shined playing the evil version of the character. I think he did a really good job as a villain. There's a reason why this version remains one of the most memorable and iconic. For top 3, this is all very personal. For me, number 3 is White Ranger Tommy. Again, the White Ranger suit has always been one of my favorites. I always felt the suit physically represented Tommy's redemption. A lot about some of the positive aspects I've spoken on in previous versions kind of culminate here of Tommy, you know, taking this thing that was forced upon him as evil, using it for good, and then finally actually being chosen by Zordon as a White Ranger, getting an opportunity to be a force for good and lead the team. I always just personally preferred White Ranger Tommy. Number 2 is Lord Draken. Getting to actually explore an Elseworld scenario where Tommy stayed evil is a cool idea in general, and on top of that, like, we get this cool new hybrid suit, this idea that he'd take the White Ranger power and forcibly graft them together into the Black Dragon coin presented something really cool. It was just a really cool idea in general, but I like that it wasn't just like, "Mwahaha, we have evil Tommy." They actually explored it in depth, and he's still very much a rogue villain character, but they explored that it has layers about his regrets and insecurities about not being accepted and worrying about not being accepted by the Rangers and ultimately not taking that path. And there's always this tone of regret there, which leads to this like resentment and anger that he didn't make that decision, which just kind of fuels his bad decisions. It's a very interesting character. Like, just in general, it's cool to have this idea of a perpetually evil version of Tommy like you always have out there, but the fact that they made him a nuanced and deep character makes it even better. And then for me, my number 1 is personally Dr. O, the Dino Thunder Black Ranger version of Tommy. Making him a paleontologist was definitely a weird choice that was clearly a remnant of Dino Thunder's original plans, and also probably the idea if JDF didn't sign on, we would just have gotten a generic mentor. But outside of that, I think Tommy really shined as a mentor. I think Tommy is a decent leader and had some good leadership qualities as the White Ranger and as Zeo Ranger 5 and Red Turbo, but I don't think that he shined quite as much as other leaders, but I think he shined more so as a mentor. I think JDF did a really good job of portraying Tommy as this version. I think, as I mentioned, I think JDF's personality slipped a little bit into things like his Bat in the Sun performance, which makes sense, but more so his anniversary appearances in Legendary Battle and in Dimensions in Danger. But here, I think he really honed into who Tommy was and who he turned into. And he kind of kept that more softness, but also a more stern confidence. And I think he worked well as a mentor just in general in the way he interacted with the current cast. But the fact that he had a past as a Ranger, and we knew it, worked really in favor of this version of the character, and I think it really shined. Not to mention, it was an exciting time to see this character return in such a big way. Back when Anniversary and Return cameos weren't really this, must be Tuesday type of thing. But that is just my personal list. Let me know what you think of this type of video. I'm hoping to continue it for other versions of the character, like I mentioned, Suits. Let me know what your favorite version of the character is in the comments. But until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. DawsonRider, signing out.